the brother of James and Joseph and Judah and Simeon. Joseph had other children. And they are not his sisters were with us. And they were offended at him. But Jesus said unto them, a prophet is without honor but in his own country and among his own kin and in his own house. And he could there do no mighty work, save he laid his hands upon a few sick folk and healed them. And he marveled because of their unbelief. And he went around about the villages teaching. Faith precedes the miraculous. If you don't have faith, you can't get the miraculous, right? And that's why it's not that Jesus loses power when he goes home. There is an absence of faith. And whenever there's an absence of faith, there's an absence of power, right? See that? It's interesting how Mark makes these connections. She heard that Jesus was passing by and said, if I can touch the hem of his garment, I shall be made whole. And straightway, she makes her way through the crowd. She has to overcome. This woman has lost her status. She's in public, uncovered by male relationships, impoverished, bleeding for 12 years, unclean for 12 years, in isolation for 12 years. She's in public. What Mark is saying, she's at the lowest she could be. She has no status, no male relationship, and not only did the doctors not help her, but she got worse. Right? And so she goes to Jesus, and straightway she said, if I may touch the hem of his garment, I shall be made whole. Now the preacher kind of used your sanctified imagination how she gets to Jesus through this crowd, that she makes her way there. And straightway, when she touches him, and straightway the fountain of her blood was dried up, and she felt in her body that she was healed of that affliction or that plague. She touches the hem of his garment, and then she heals. She feels the healing, right? So she's restored. And then what happens in verse 30? And Jesus immediately, knowing in himself that virtue had gone out of him, turned about in the press and said, who touched my clothes? Why is that so profound, what Jesus is saying? She didn't touch him. She touched his clothes. But Jesus recognizes that he's been touched, right?
Yeah, he could feel something. He could feel something that came out of him.
He felt,
feel
yeah.
something.
He felt something. It was a woman. He felt a person with a need.
Right. He felt that need. And he calls that word virtue or power had gone out of him. And he turns around and says, who touched? Now, are there people touching Jesus?
Yes.
Yes, because he's in a what? He's in a crowd of people. Right. And so is there magical power, magical fairy dust in his clothes?
No.
No. Right?
And they touching him for the wrong reason.
And they're not touching for the same reason. And so the power is within Jesus himself, not in the clothes that Jesus has on. Right? And so when she touches Jesus, she touches something connected to him, but Jesus recognizes immediately that power has flown out of him into someone else, and he turns around and says, who touched me? Now let's put another people in there.
Because it was a spiritual gift.
It was a spiritual
that Jesus had from his Father.
Okay.
And that's what he was sent here for. So when the woman touched him and he felt the virtue running out of him, he said, this is what my Father sent me for. Those other people was touching him for popularity.
Yeah, they were touching him just out of, well, if you're in a crowd, people going to bump into you, right? But this woman has a touch of need. She has a touch of desperation. Jesus feels power coming out of him. And now we get that woman story. If we stop right there, now who starts talking? The disciples. And what do they say?
You can be touched by anybody. Anybody touch you.
Being disgruntled.
Yeah, all these people touching you.
Yeah.
Okay? So immediately, who gets it and who doesn't?
The woman gets it.
The woman gets it,
They fail the
and the
test.
disciples don't get it.
Right.
Right?
Yet again.
Yet again. So if Mark is setting the stage, you got two people. Who do you want to be like? You want to be like the woman, or you want to be like the disciple?
You want to be like that woman.
You want to be like the woman because she's the example of faith. You remember the parable of the sower. She hears it, receives it. The disciple said, you must be crazy. lot of people touching you because they see the crowd. And then Jesus has to repeat again, who touched me? And he looked around and seeing her that had done this. But the woman, fearing and trembling, knowing what was done in her, came and fell down before him and told him all the truth. I want you to get a snapshot of how the woman looks in verse 33 and how the woman looks in verse 28. In verse 28, she said, if I can just touch the hem of his garment, I shall be made whole. In verse 33, she's feared and trembling. What's that about?
She's been made whole. She got what she wanted.
She got what she, but if she got what she wanted, what's she scared of?
I think she was afraid in the manner in which she got it.
Okay, the manner in which she got it, which was what?
But she touched him.
She touched him.
It wasn't like Jairus asked for Jesus to do something for him.
She touched without permission.
Yeah.
But, and also,
She had permission, but she touched him without permission.
she touched a holy man without permission, and she's also what? Unclean.
Right.
So if she was to touch him, she infects him.
Right.
Right.
She told him all the truth. That's what
She
it
comes
said.
and tell him all the
She told
truth.
him everything about herself.
Okay.
What she had been through. Like he didn't know, but that's what the book says. She told him everything.
She told him everything.
Not just about her issue, I guess, but all the trials she'd been through, the position she had been to, and all that good stuff.
Yeah.
That's what the word says. She told him everything.
But why do some of the parables speak about serve the Lord with fear and trembling?
Serve the Lord with fear and trembling with reverence, with a sense of reverent type fear of God, fear of the judgment of God, fear of the identity and the power of God. This woman is extremely bold when she's at home in her desperation. She is unclean. She comes to Jesus through this great barrier of the crowd, and she touches him with such great boldness. But the minute she's healed, she's now no longer unclean. She knows that. But when Jesus says, who touched me, surrounded by all these men, she gets afraid. Because now she has reverted back to who she used to be.
Even though she's been healed.
Even though she's been healed, now she said, oh, I'm in this male environment now. You see. So what happens is sometimes the boldness it takes getting there can disappear once you arrive. You see. And I'm not trying to diminish her. I just want to show you that the big difference between the woman in the beginning, because now she's in a world of she's restored. Her status is restored in this male-centered society where men are the movers and shakers, if you will, and the women is beneath the man. But then what does Jesus do? I think that's important. She was fearing and trembling. And then Jesus says to her, what's the first word Jesus says to her?
Daughter.
Daughter. If he calls her daughter, then who is her father?
He is.
He is. Just like Jairus' daughter has a father that's pleading for me to come, you've come, and now I have become your father. Right. Jesus restores the parental relationship. Right. Jesus is whose father? He's our father, right? We can ask anything. And his name is God. So he restores. So he calls her daughter, and he says, as we talked earlier, thy faith has made thee whole. Go in peace and be healed of thy plague. He didn't say your touch made you whole. That's very significant. We dissected that already. It was her faith, not the action. It is what motivated the action that allowed her to be healed. If she had never said, if I can touch the hem of his garment, I shall be made whole, and then she goes and touched him, would anything have happened? No. Because what happened when Jesus gets home to Nazareth? The people who know him the best doubt his identity, his messianic identity, right. His divine self. That's why they focus on his human nature. Yeah. They look at these brothers, these sisters here. They look at the carnal way, and because of their own mindset and their lack of faith, Jesus cannot do many miracles even in his hometown. Because the purpose of miracles is not to produce faith. All right? It's what Mark is trying to tell us. Faith produces miracles.
But you know, you have to have faith. That goes with you, with her, with me. Mm-hmm. When you find faith and stuff, when you find the Lord and stuff like that, you're going to have people that remember you from your older days. And they're not going to never believe what you came into, man.
Right.
And even though you show it every day, they still going to have doubt.
They still going to have doubt. And watch this. Should you waste your time trying to convince them?
No.
Because Jesus did it. And that's one of the most important lessons of that in chapter 6. Yeah. Jesus does not stay in Nazareth and keep working and working, trying to convince people who will never come to faith that he is who he is. He just moves on.
Moved on. Kept on moving.
And that's what he tells his disciples. If you go into a city and you knock on a house and they don't receive you, shake the dust from your feet, has a testament against them, and then move on, right? So oftentimes we struggle trying to convince people that will never be convinced. That's right. We are who we are, right? But if we take Jesus' example, Jesus just moves on. Just moves on.
About the volume.
It's a volume. You got to get out
there,
as
many
right?
people. You got to reach as many people as possible. You wouldn't, sit there waiting for somebody to just, I'm not going to move until Pastor Atkins say he accepts. No, it don't work like that.
It don't work like that, and don't cast your pearls before swine. Yeah. People who don't appreciate it, don't even know what a pearl is. You see, why would you kind of waste that? And so we see this part of the text, and then immediately in verse 35, this is why I like Mark. He goes from one to the other. Immediately we are in Jairus' house, right? Yet when they spoke, there came from the ruler of the synagogue house certain that said, "Thy daughter is dead. Why troublest thou the master any further?" And as soon as Jesus heard the word that was spoken, he said unto the ruler of the synagogue, "Be not afraid, only" what? Believe. Believe. And he suffered no man to follow him except Peter, James, and John, the brother of James. Now we get this sense of the inner circle of the disciples. We got the 12, but we got an inner circle that have the privilege of going with Jesus in some private matters. And he comes into the house of the ruler of the synagogue and sees the tumult or the big crowd up there, and them that were weeping and wailing greatly. What's outside the house? A big crowd. What did the woman have to overcome to get to Jesus?
A big crowd.
A big crowd. What did Jesus got to overcome to get to this daughter?
A big crowd.
A big crowd. You see how Mark is just connecting these things over and over again. Not only do we have to overcome barriers to get to Jesus, Jesus overcomes barriers to get to us.
You. Yep.
You see that? Mm-hmm. So it does not set us up for spiritual laziness when there are barriers. Okay? The woman, she's a woman. She's unclean. She's impoverished. She's uncovered by male relationship, but she's overcome all of that and makes her way to Jesus. At the end of chapter 4, Jesus goes through a storm in order to get to that man that needs to see him in the cemetery. He gets there, and notice what happened in verse 39. And when he was come in, he said unto them, "Why makest this ado, and weep? The damsel is not dead, but sleeping." Stop right there. Hold the presses. What has Jesus just been told?
She was dead.
She was at the point of death.
At the point of death in the beginning, when Jairus comes, she's at the point of death. But when he has this interruption with this other woman, the servant comes and tells Jairus what?
She's dead.
She's dead. Right? Ain't no need coming home. But why you bring Jesus here? He's dead. And Jesus says she's not dead.
She's asleep.
What is Jesus saying?
He said, and you looking at the corner, but I'm carrying the spirit with me.
Okay, I'm looking at the spiritual side. I'm God of who?
Living in
Because remember Mark says Jesus, when they hear Jesus teaching, he teaches as one that has authority, right? In the beginning, he has authority over unclean spirits. Then we got to see he has authority over fevers. Then we got authority over wind and the rain. What kind of man is this that even the wind and the sea obey him? Now he got the power over sickness, but now he has the power over what? And Jesus is about to do this miracle, and it marks the ultimate example of Jesus' authority is his power over what?
Death.
Death. He dies on Friday,
Over the world.
but gets up on Sunday morning.
Yeah.
You see that? Yes, come on in there. Jump on in here. He got one back there. He got a mic back there.
It's like what you say, he got power over death. Well, look at here. How long had she been dead? Because look on this same situation.
Mm-hmm.
Mary and Martha. My brother been dead for 4 days. We sent for you.
Mm-hmm.
And you did not move. You stayed there, although you was like right down the street. Only thing he said was, and that go back to where you said he got power over death. They upset with, we sent for you and you didn't come. If you'd have been here, our brother had not died. He didn't ask no question. Show me where you laid him.
Mm-hmm.
So that lets us know that, hey, all power is in his hand, not ours.
It's not ours, it's in his. Mm-hmm.
And not only that, rigor mortis has set in.
Yeah.
And Jesus was, he was a 3-day journey from where he was supposed to be going, and all he had to do, Lazarus was right down the street, like the next scene.
Short journey.
But Jesus
delayed.
this was kind of God, well, this was kind of person Jesus is, because we know it's God the Father, then Jesus. But Jesus, just like he told his mother, hey, my hour haven't came. You know, he had to get authority from his Father to do anything. And that's what the whole basis of where faith come in. And even when he was at the base of the cross of Lazarus, who did he pray to? He prayed up to his Father. And he called Lazarus. He called him by his name. If he just said, get up, everybody in the grave would have got up.
Right. Big hot?
No, I was just, from an instance that before he got there, she had died. But I think in God's time, there's no time, right? I mean, it's like from one step to the next step.
That's a great point,
from
because
God's perspective, because
he
just moves at his will, right?
He moves at his will.
Because if you think about it, he could have raised Lazarus from the spot he was standing. He didn't have to move. He could have just said, Lazarus, come forth from where he was. But the humbling part about that, and I talk to this all the time when people experience death, it's just like, even though Jesus knew he had the power to raise Lazarus from the dead, the shortest verse of the Bible says Jesus wept. And that just kind of lets you know his humanity, that he feels what we feel when we go through our trials and sufferings. But that instance, he could have just did it. But like I say, there's no time and space. In God's.
And in the kingdom perspective, there is no element of time.
Right.
Because if you come from Lazarus' servant's perspective, Jesus has run out of time. But Jesus is oblivious. Jesus tells his disciples, particularly in Matthew's gospel, don't worry about times or seasons when the Son of Man should come. So what Jesus gives us a glimpse in the kingdom understanding, there's no sense, there is no understanding of, there's no element of Jesus being late to anything. Lateness comes from us, not from him. Because if Jesus can be early, he can be on time, he can be late. But in the kingdom perspective, there is no sense of early, on time, or late.
Because that's why that song says he's an on-time God.
Yeah.
He may not come when you want him, but he's right on time.
He's right on time.
That's our moment. And he didn't turn around and say, I shall supply all your needs, not your wants. Yeah.
Right.
That's omnipresent.
And so our frustration comes when we take our mind and make the kingdom fit in our mind. So God is late.
That's why I say weeping may do it for a night, but joy cometh
In the morning,
but
right?
that ain't for God. That's for us.
That's for us. And that's saying that there is a time for weeping and there's a timing for joy. But we say, well, I got to weep tonight. I got joy in the morning. But weeping don't have to last all night. Yeah, Mike.
Yeah, but we are forgetting people never seen this before.
Yeah.
And you're going to tell me this, Jesus ain't been there. He's 33 years up there. So I've never seen nobody just been brought up from the dead before. And you're going to tell me this. So I'm looking at them. If you want to be for real, hey, how many people done died that didn't woke up and been brought up? So all of a sudden you got this man that's going to do this now. You've never seen this before.
You never seen it.
So guess what? I'm doubtful.
You're
I'm
doubtful.
not trying to be ugly, but I'm doubtful.
Yeah, that's the human reaction.
You got to be in reality.
Yeah, all the disciples are caught up in
It's
this.
reality, man.
And so it's difficult for them. It's easier for us because we put all of this in it. But if you read it as if you are experiencing at that moment, when Jesus says this woman is sleeping, that makes no logical sense at all. In the church sense, it's the preaching part. Okay, but you're reading that in there. But when Jairus hears that, there is no, Jesus is illogical. Now I can see why people laugh at him. Because that makes no sense at all. Brother Ben.
No, I'm just going to just ask a question. You brought up Lazarus and Mary and Martha. Didn't he say somewhere it was good that I wasn't here when...
Yes.
That's what I want you to lay rest. I want you to expound.
That's hard because when they say Lazarus died, Jesus says he's sleeping. And they said, well, he's going to get better then if he's sleeping. And Jesus says, no, y'all still don't get it. He's dead. And I'm glad that I wasn't there. Because Jesus is always on a greater mission than what we are expecting him to be on. Mary and Martha have reason to gripe because Jesus was a friend of Lazarus.
He ate that.
He ate that. Bethany was Jesus. It's like when you got a friend in a certain time. Anytime I go through Grand Prairie, I'm going to stop over at my friend's house. You see what I mean? See what he's doing. Every time Jesus passed close to Bethany, he went to Mary and Martha and Lazarus' house. He was there all the time. And so when they sent for Jesus, if there was anyone who Jesus should have dropped everything for, it should have been them. But he doesn't.
But
and
not you know that you can't tell him what to do.
Because who? He says, I must work the works of what? Him that sent me. Not those who are calling me, but the one that's sending me. And Jesus says, I want to delay it because it's for a greater purpose that Lazarus died. Because you need to see that I have power over death, not only in eternity, Mary and Martha, because when Jesus says, I'm the resurrection and the life, if any man believes in him, he should not die but have. They said, we know that in the last day. But Jesus says, no, the kingdom is now.
The kingdom is now. You'll see him again.
And so that's the point. That's why Jesus said, for your sake, I'm glad I wasn't there. Because I need to add a chapter 2 on your resurrection theology. I don't have to wait until the last day. I can resurrect Lazarus now. And remember when he's at the grave, he says very clearly, Lord, you have always heard me, but for the sake of those who are around, Lazarus come forward. You see. Lazarus in the example of Jesus identifying himself as the Son of God, that he's the resurrection and the life in a public field and not just privately. Yeah. Oh, okay.
And God gets the glory.
God gets the glory.
That's why he didn't want to do it like you were saying.
He
From
could have
a
done it
distance.
there, but
Yeah.
He wanted his father to get the glory.
Right.
He wanted them to know. Don't think that when he left the base of the tomb, people wanted to ask him, how did you do that? He said, I didn't do that, but my Father in me gave me the authority.
And that is so interesting about Jesus because Jesus is God.
Right.
But he's still subservient to the Father. I must work the works of him that sent me while it is day. For when night comes, no man can work. In the garden, Father, take this cup from me, but nevertheless not my will, but thy will be done. The greatest act of submission is what Jesus does. He is God.
Right.
God the Father, God the Son, God the Holy Spirit. All that is within him. But even in that, he's obedient to his Father. And now you can see why Paul said in the book of Philippians, he considered it not robbery to be equal with God, but made himself of no reputation and made himself in the form of a servant and became obedient even unto the point of death. Right. And so that's why, because of that, God has highly exalted him that at the name of Jesus, every knee shall bow, and every tongue shall confess. So when you see and we use the word humility, not in the original sense, but when you see the humility of Jesus and the humbling of Jesus, then you see the exaltation of Jesus. And so Jesus comes in this house, and they laugh at him. Because we out here crying because the woman is dead. Right? Jesus says she's sleeping. Kingdom. On the earth, dead. In the kingdom, sleeping. Death on our line is permanent. In the kingdom's perspective, temporary. What the people saw as a permanent situation, Jesus saw as a what? Temporary situation. Right? If you go to sleep, what's the expectation?
You wake up.
You wake up. The moment Jesus says she sleep, faith will say, well, she's going to wake up. Mm-hmm. Remember, just like the disciple. If Lazarus sleep, he's going to wake up. So Jesus goes in with his inner circle, Peter, James, and John, after he puts them out. Y'all get out of here. Just the inner circle goes up. In verse 4.
I was going to add one thing before you move on. And that's why it's so evident when we have funerals. Mm-hmm. The body is prostrated before the people. Mm-hmm. What are we looking at? We're looking at the corner. Mm-hmm. Yeah. But like you say, coming from a creature, people, a child of God perspective, we're looking at the spirit.
We're looking at the spirit, and that's why when you look at your theology, then you can explain your practice. That's why at a funeral, the comfort comes, they're not there, right? They're alive in heaven. Right? That's theology. That's just not words of comfort, that's theology, you see. And so what we're saying is, we'll see them again. Logic says they dead. Right. You ain't gonna see them again. You may see them one more time when you get to the cemetery, but after that, there's nothing, right? Jesus is saying she's sleeping, not dead. So Jesus redefines death, right? Redefines it. And when he put them out, he goes to his mother and he touches her, verse 41, and he took the damsel by the hand. He touches her. What did the woman with the issue of blood just do?
Touch
Jesus. Now what does Jesus do to this girl?
He touches
her. The woman with the issue of blood was unclean, but she touched Jesus. The woman, the damsel, is dead. She's sure enough unclean, but Jesus what? Touches her. And then what happened? What does Mark say happened next?
Yes, he told her to arise.
Told her to arise. Telatama kumi, which is said, being interpreted, damsel, I say unto you, arise. And straightway the damsel rose and walked, and she was of the age of 12 years. And they were astonished with a great astonishment. And he charged them straightway that no man should know it, and commanded they should give her something to eat. Why does Jesus say, feed her?
That's a sign of life.
That's a sign. Because ghosts don't eat. You see? Right. Jesus never does anything for no reason. Jesus says, because people, they believe in spirits, but spirits don't eat. Jesus says, feed her, has confirmation that the miracle has taken place. You remember in the Old Testament, there was a Shunammite woman that had a relationship with a prophet. You remember? She gave up having a child. Elijah said, you're going to have a child according to the next season of life. She has a child, and the child has a heat stroke. Remember, he comes and said, my head dies. She lays him in an upper chamber in the room. And the prophet comes in after she rolled and told the prophet to come, and he comes and he touches her, and the boy is brought back to life. Same thing here. People who are Jewish vein, who are hearing this story, are reminded what Elijah did with the Shunammite woman. And it's the same thing Jesus is doing now. Brother man, give him the mic for me.
12 years, and his daughter, he's right, it's 12 years old.
12 years and 12 years.
12 years.
12 years and 12 years. So you see how Mark is connecting these stories. When you see the same word or phrase or number repeated, that's the author connecting to. So Mark said, if you want to understand the story of the damsel, Jairus' daughter, you got to understand the story of the one with the issue of blood. 12 disciples. 12 years. 12 years old. All of us going. Yes, somebody had put. Okay, somebody put.
How many gates to the city?
12 gates to the city. 12 foundations. We see that? 12 tribes of Israel. We see all of this going on. So Mark is connecting us. And remember, in Mark's mind, there are 4 responses to Jesus. Either you're going to be the pathway where the seed is sown and the devil comes in and snatches it away, or you're going to be the stony ground where you spring up, but when the cares of this life, that's what the sun represents, comes in, you're scorched away. Or you have number 3, you come among the thorns, in which the desire for riches and the concerns of the world come up, you're choked out. Or number 4, you're fruitful. You receive, you hear it, you receive it, you're fruitful. You're fruitful. The damsel, fruitful. The one with the issue of blood, fruitful. Let me give an example, number 2. You remember the rich young ruler who comes to Jesus. And Jesus says, sell all you have, take up your cross and follow me. He walks away weeping. Why? Because he has this emotional response. But when the cares of the world come, he's number 3, the desires of riches come. The gospel is choked out because he don't want to leave the money behind. And so what we see in this story, in chapter 5, we get 3 individuals who are unnamed that have encountered with Jesus. The man in the tomb, the woman with the issue of blood, Jairus' daughter. Each is an example of faith. And it's interesting that Mark is going countercultural to show women as examples of faith. He's also showing people who are on the margins of society, people who are unclean, people who hang out in the cemeteries, as examples of faith. People who hear it, receive it, and are fruitful, they go out and tell somebody what Jesus has done. Y'all getting quiet on me. What do y'all think? What do y'all see in the text?
God is amazing.
Dissected, you see so much of what Mark is doing. He devotes a whole chapter to this. He devotes a whole chapter to 3 examples of faith, not by the disciples, edges of society, or the people that can also have faith. It's important that Mark is including the excluded in the gospel. You see that?
They can have a relationship with God too.
They can have a relationship with God, and they can be an example of faithfulness. They can be an example of faithfulness. If you look at the other gospels, who was the first one to hear that Jesus is born in Bethlehem? It's shepherds. You're talking about really being on the outside of society. They were illiterate. They were on the outskirts of society. But they received the announcement. Mark is intentional about who Jesus encounters and why. The next story we're going to look at, and this will probably be the end of Mark, is 2 stories. Chapter 7, we get this Syrophoenician woman. And in chapter 14, we get the woman who anoints Jesus. 7, and then chapter 12. Chapter 7, and then chapter 12, which is this widow's offering. We're going to look at that. Because that Mark is trying to tell us something unique about that. What do y'all think? Questions, comments, concerns?
My thing is faith is all you need. Because even all we talk about is faith. And we talking about touching too. But Jesus healed people with just having faith. The centurion, he just said, go home on your faith has healed your servant.
Right.
So it's faith is what counts for everything. So.
Faith counts for everything. So how, in the last 3 minutes, I know I'm going to give it back to you next week, how would you define faith? What is Mark trying to tell us? What does faith look like? How would you define it?
Belief in Jesus Christ, man. Belief in the Lord our God. Belief that God controls everything. He controls power, life, death, and everything.
He controls everything.
Believe that, and you have to believe it in your heart. If you can believe it in your heart, that's what faith is.
That's what faith is the belief in your heart has all power. Anybody else? What else you think?
And it's a repetition of spiritual calisthenics.
Is that working out of the faith.
Right.
That's important. Faith requires action. We see the woman, it overcomes barriers, right?
And obstacles.
Obstacles. It propels a person forward of what faith is.
Well, one thing the Bible do let us know, we hadn't been through anything that Jesus didn't experience.
Yes, he experienced
The
all of it.
weeping, the pain, the suffering, the thorns in the head, the piercing of the side. It's nothing that we've gone through that he haven't experienced. And if you could just remind yourself of those little analytics right there, you'd be all right.
You'll be all right. Yeah.
You know, they
There's
always,
nothing too hard for God.
That's right.
and although the Bible says you have the faith the size of mustard seed, but you just can't keep the mustard seeds in your pocket. You got to build up on it. You got to plant it. You got to
faith
do something.
requires
It requires it. It'll get you started, but you know it can't sustain you if you just kind of just keep that little.
It gets you started.
Right.
That's the mustard seed. It just propels you forward. Yeah.
Because the man with the palsy, I mean, his friends picked him up and took him through the roof. That's faith, because I mean, you know.
That's faith. Faith is the action part of it. And faith is what prompts miracles. Now, miracles can produce faith. I'm not going to say that in black and white. But what Mark is saying is that this woman had faith that got her to Jesus, and that was the reason she was healed. And that's why he says your faith, not your touch, your faith has made you whole. She could have faith at home, and she would have died at home. But the fact that her faith propelled her out of her house, over the obstacles, through the crowd, touching Jesus, she was healed. Faith, and James says, faith without works is what? Dead. And we got a living example, because if she just stayed at home and saying, if I can touch the hem of his garment, I shall be made whole, she would have died. But the fact that her faith propels her forward allows her to get healing. And so we can't say we have faith if there's no action behind it. If your faith never propels you forward. Her faith was strong.
Very strong. She believed in extreme faith. She knows she just touched, or even getting near him, she's healed.
She was healed.
But Pastor, just like you were saying, miracles can produce faith if you open to it. If you don't have faith, you got to be willing. And you got to be
do.
open.
I mean, they say no one comes to God unless God draws him. God gives us that example of faith. But you also have those people that have that kind of near-death experience, or something catastrophic happen that leads them to the Lord, and that's the Lord working out through that. But I think
I can attest to that, because like when I went to, when I was going through breast cancer, Sister Wheeler told me that I just come out the fiery furnace, and he's in there waiting for you. Well, you have to have faith and hold on to that. Like in the days, Brother Levine used to sing the song, I'm just holding on.
holding on.
Holding on to my faith.
Yeah.
Would not let go. I mean, that's what it's all about.
You got to have
Seeing it for yourself, just not saying the Lord is this, the Lord is. You have to step out on faith.
You got to step out on it. It's the action of it.
Yeah.
It's the action of it. Yeah.
A question from Brother Val. Why is faith birthed out of desperate situations?
Oh, now that's a whole different conversation. I can deal an hour on that. It does not have to come from desperate situations. And I love that, because we often teach faith coming out of desperation. But what we see is the strength of faith to overcome a desperate situation, okay? Because the situation gives you a reason not to have faith, right? And so the power of faith, that it overcomes the obstacle of even my present experience. And so we see that in those desperate situations, the woman has faith that's so strong, it propels her to overcome her situation, right? But yes, faith is often produced in those desperate situations, because when you are out of options, sometimes you see the greatest option,
That's all you got.
which is Christ. And that's why the woman exhausts her options before she gets to Christ.
And that's like God uses these instances that witness this stuff, probably walked in with zero faith.
With zero faith.
And just walked off the street and saw that. Did you see what happened? That Jesus did that? That's the Son of God? And that's the point.
That's the point. You
So
see,
you can witness it and not have any faith and become a believer just by witnessing.
through your witness, other people can become faithful.
Yeah,
Through what God does for individual, masses can be converted.
right.
Also, I think that he hears his voice and harden his heart. You got
Yes.
That's why he said, everybody that said, Lord, Lord, Lord,
Don't know him.
not going to enter into
And
the
you
kingdom.
can't
Not
hear
going to
it.
enter into the kingdom. So,
And that's why Jesus and Mark said there's 4 responses to it.
yes.
You can hear it and then
And
Satan
then-
come and steal it.
Yeah. Something come along and let it kill it. You got
You look at the
strong.
Pharisees and the scribes.
You
I
got-
hear Jesus, but don't make no difference to me. They in the same crowd the man getting healed at, but they never get healed. And so we got to be careful when we teach and preach faith. That's what it looks like. The funeral. Let's continue to pray as we dismiss. Funeral is going to be Saturday at 11 o'clock here at the Salem Church. The burial will be in Ferris at the Carver Cemetery. The trunk or treat, we're praying for good weather so we can have it outside. But we also, if it is bad weather, we will have it inside as well. So we are already planning for the contingency of having it inside. May God bless you and may God keep you. And may always God let his face shine upon you and grant you his peace. And everyone who had the faith to believe that said together, amen.